Waypoints. It's good to be with you again this week. I have the pleasure of introducing our section of scripture that we will be studying this week. We'll be wrapping up Mark chapter 4, and this is kind of a cool story of Jesus and his interaction with his disciples. Over the past few months, if I'm just really honest, it's been a crazy whirlwind in my life. In the past 2 months, I've traveled to 8 different states, and I've been away from home some portion of the last 6 out of 8 weeks. And yeah, it's just a lot of time away from home and away from family and away from your community. And when I travel, I find that I have to put my trust in other people, that they're going to help me out in doing things that I can't do because I'm not at home. And the person that I put the most amount of trust in to help me out is my wife. And she kind of bears the responsibility of doing some of the things that I would normally do while I'm away from home. But even when she and I are together and we're traveling, we're often putting our faith and trust in other people, our neighbors or friends or family members. Neighbors who might get our mail for us while we're traveling, or you get that unexpected package delivered to your door and you don't want to have it sitting on your porch for a week, so you call a friend or a neighbor and ask them to get it for you and hold on to it, or put it in your garage. And we do a lot of those kind of things where we're trusting in other people when we're away from home. And that's just kind of a normal part of being part of a community. Every day we put our trust in a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, and sometimes we just take those things for granted. As for example, you can probably hear traffic going by. Every time we get into a car and we drive down the road around other vehicles, we're putting a lot of trust in the drivers of those other vehicles, that they're not going to be distracted and cause an accident or involve us in an accident. You go to a restaurant and you're trusting that the person cooking your food has washed their hands and is taking care of the food in a way that makes it safe. When I ride my bike down the road, I'm trusting that cars are going to give me the room that I need to keep me safe. Even when you buy something online on eBay or on Amazon, you're trusting these companies that they're going to keep your data safe and secure. And a lot of our day is spent trusting other people. Every day we put our trust in a lot of other people, and that's kind of what our verses are about this week. So let me just read these verses to you. It says, "As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, 'Let's cross to the other side of the lake.' So they took Jesus in the boat and they started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, 'Teacher, don't you care that we are going to drown?' When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, 'Silence, be still.' Suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, 'Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?' The disciples were absolutely terrified. 'Who is this man?' they asked each other. Even the winds and the waves obey him." Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. And we see this lack of trust in the disciples. Despite all they've seen and experienced with their time with Jesus, they're still not at a place where they fully trust Jesus. Jesus clearly demonstrates his trust in God the Father. He's sleeping with his head on a cushion in the back of the boat with what you would assume to be no care in the world. He's sleeping through the storm because he trusts that God is in control and God is trustworthy. He believes that God is watching over everything that happens to him. But the disciples are not yet in that place of trust yet with Jesus. And it's totally natural for each one of us to struggle with trust and struggle with trusting in God. It's hard to trust in something that is unseen and unknown sometimes. But if we're willing to put our faith and trust in God and believe that God is in control, then we can sleep through the storms of life. So please join me this week as I pass it on to Todd and he explores these verses a little bit more, and just know that you can trust in God.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight at WaypointsGO. We've hit this very interesting passage in Mark, kind of a famous passage. If you're familiar with the New Testament and the stories of Jesus, it's kind of this familiar story. And so I want to really slowly walk through it, because I think one of the problems is because this story is famous, because the story is well known, we have a tendency to think that we know it. We have a tendency to go, oh, okay, I already know what it's going to say, and that may not be completely true. We have maybe not embraced the humanity of this moment enough. So I want to make sure that we understand it. So we're going to kind of slowly walk through these verses. And so even though they've been read, I'm going to reread them a little bit, kind of stopping. If you remember, Jesus is at the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He's been teaching. He's been, healing people. He's been doing all these sorts of things. And the crowd is pretty full, and it begins to push Jesus kind of off the shore. He's kind of being overwhelmed. And so Jesus gets into the boat to cross the Sea of Galilee. And it says this in verse 35, as evening came, Jesus said to the disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. He was already in the boat, so they started out, leaving the crowds behind, although boats followed. And so what we get is this image with all of these people packed to wanting to hear what Jesus has to say. And some scholars connect this to the Sermon on the Mount that we find in Matthew 5, 6, 7, and 8 in the same moment. And so the crowd is so full, it begins to push Jesus into the water because everybody's crowding around him. And so he gets into a boat and he tells these disciples to begin setting sail for the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So let's stop for a moment. Let's understand the Sea of Galilee. It's kind of our first opportunity to look at this. The Sea of Galilee is actually an unusual body of water. It's relatively small. It's about 13 miles long, about 7 miles wide, but it has 150 feet deep, and the shoreline is 680 feet below sea level. Okay, so that's kind of important. It is fresh water and has a very steady, comfortable temperature, unlike the Dead Sea. It has clear sandy beaches along the seashore, and it has lots of different kinds of fish. And the sea is surrounded by this mountain range to the east and to the west that rise over 2,650 feet above the lake. And because of the unique geography of all of this, it creates an opportunity for some really strange weather, all right? Now, also, don't forget, as we're having this conversation, that when Jesus gets into the boat and they begin to sail away, that most of his disciples, or at least a good portion of them, are actually sailors. They're fishermen. They've spent their entire life on the Sea of Galilee doing their job, right? And so don't forget that they are seasoned fishermen, right? Now, a typical Galilean boat needed a crew of at least 5 to handle the boat, 4 rowers and a rudderman. Now, it could carry as many as 16. And the phrase, the other boats, that Mark uses here suggested that the group is not just the 12, but there's other people as well. And the ancient historian Josephus actually tells us that there were more than 300 fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee at one time, right? Just to kind of give you an idea of its activity, right? And so traveling on the Sea of Galilee at night was a very common experience for most of these fishermen. And because of the mountains and it being below sea level, the storms, when they rolled in and got that really strange wind, the Sea of Galilee has recorded waves up to 20 foot tall. Just enormous, enormous waves. So Jesus is exhausted. He spent his entire day teaching. He spent his entire day healing. You know, he does all of this sorts of stuff. He gets into the boat and Jesus is like, I'm taking a nap, right? I'm going night-night. I need to relax. And so we see Jesus in his humanity just utterly exhausted. And so he goes to sleep. And then Mark continues in verse 37. It says, but soon a fierce storm arose. High waves began to break into the boat until it was nearly full of water. Now that's extremely important for you and I to understand, just that phrase. Now, a typical shipping or fishing boat would have really narrow sides to it. And that was completely on purpose because you're fishing and you're using nets to throw into the water, get these fish, and then you got to pull the fish up into the boat. This is before cranes. This is before all that technology. So you got to kind of manhandle them up and over the side. So you want your edges a little low, right? So that you can do that. So you're not physically killing yourself. Now, it is interesting. In verse 37, Mark records some unique Greek words that we kind of miss out in our English language. Mark uses the word getsmo. And Luke, when he's describing this situation, he uses the word samplero, and grismo means to fill entirely, and Luke's word means to swamp. So we really get this idea, this image that the water is flowing in so much, it's literally sinking, right? It's being swamped, it's being overtaken, and this is a huge deal. I mean, they are in trouble. And you've got these experienced sailors, and they know that they are in danger. They know that they're in trouble right here in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And so they begin to panic. And so it says to us a little bit later on, it says, frantically, they woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you even care that we're going to drown?" Now, hold on to that sentence. We'll get to that a little bit later, right? When he woke up, he rebuked the wind and said, "Quiet down." And suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Man, okay, you just got to understand. I mean, can you even begin to imagine? Now, first of all, once again, these are seasoned sailors. They grew up on the lake doing this thing. They have seen storms come and go. They've been in their fair share of storms, and they are panicked. They are freaking out. They are so freaking out, so panicked, that they wake up the carpenter and ask him to help, right? When you are a fisherman asking a carpenter about sailing advice, you know you're in trouble, right? It is just this huge deal, and they're completely panicked. And then Jesus gets up, and he silences the storm. And immediately the water becomes calm. Luke describes it in the Greek as calm as glass. So here he is. They're just rocking back and forth in all of this storm. And Jesus screams into the storm and just silences everything. And it doesn't like slowly go back to calm. It says instantly it is smooth as glass. And then Jesus turns to his disciples and he says something interesting. He says this, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still not have faith in me?" And they were filled with awe and said among themselves, "Who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey him?" So imagine, put yourself in this humanity, right? Put yourself in this moment. The boat's rocking. You think you're going to die. You wake Jesus up. He screams. The storm instantly goes away. The water instantly goes to glass. You're holding onto the edge of the boat because you think you're about to die. You're about to drown. And then Jesus turns to you and says, "Why do you doubt me?" I wonder how long it took for someone to say something after Jesus went back to bed. They're all holding on, and I'm not sure that they're more afraid of the storm or they're more afraid of Jesus at this moment. But Jesus goes back to sleep, and slowly they're like, "What was that? Who?" Right? And they have this freak out moment afterwards, as well as they have a freak out moment in the midst of it. Now, Justin is going to unpack some meaning and what all this means, but I want us to hold on to one verse before I pass it on to him. It says this, let me find it here. And that one verse that I want to hold on to, we find at the very beginning here. It says, Mark chapter 4, verse 37. It says, "But soon a fierce storm arose. High waves began to break into the boat until it was nearly full of water. Jesus was sleeping in the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. Frantically, here it is, frantically they woke him up, shouting, 'Teacher, don't you even care that we're going to drown?'" The reason why I want to hold on to that, you've got these seasoned fishermen. They understand the sea, they understand the situation that they are in. And they wake up Jesus because they believe he does not care about their situation. He doesn't care that they are about to drown. And I wonder how often you and I ask that same question. Something's going on in our lives, something unfair, something out of control, and we're like, "God, don't you even care?" The other thing that I think I want to add to that is the physical location of where they're at, right? Seasoned fishermen. They're looking at the wind. They're looking at the waves. They're hearing it. They're feeling it. They're experiencing it. And in all of these things that visually they're seeing, physically, they lose their faith spiritually. One of the things that I love to do with my wrestlers is to have a moment where I get blindfolds and I blindfold them. And I make them wrestle each other blind. And I tell them this: your eyes deceive you. You need to be able to feel the moment. You need to be able to feel their momentum and where their weight is and where your weight is. And your eyes can deceive you. And it can cause you to think, "Oh, I'm going to do this," when that's a bad decision. "Oh, I'm going to do that," and that's a bad decision because your eyes fooled you. I wonder how many times in our spiritual journey, just like these disciples, our eyes fool us.
WaypointsGO is a crowd-funded mission community that is on the go. And it's made possible by people like you, where it's adding value to your spiritual life. So if that's you and you want to partner with us, then check out the links below and it'll take you right to the places that you can give. There are many times when I wish I could have calmed the storm. When the rain is coming in and it's just getting really crazy and I want it to stop. There are many times I wish I could have just hit that pause button and turned it off. You know, I remember about 15 years ago driving through Windsor when a tornado rolled through Windsor, May of 2008. I was just driving and the weather was just an average overcast day. In fact, when we got up, the sun was out, but the humidity level was really high. Not like surprisingly high where you thought that something bad was going to happen, but just unusually high for our climate and where we live in Colorado. It was only because it was so out of the ordinary that I remember feeling that humidity. But the sun was out and didn't think anything of it, just a nice spring day. And then, like any other spring day, storms, they come and go, and the light clouds began to build, and the breeze settled in for the rest of the morning. Nothing too out of the normal. And I was driving my work truck, and I had a lunch break that allowed me to meet up with my pregnant wife at the time, and I headed that way, got in the truck, and headed that way to go grab some lunch, and just driving, and it began to rain just a little bit. The clouds really aren't black and ominous. There was no lightning, there was no wind. It was just this light gray overcast day. And I headed that way. I called her to tell her that I would be a few minutes late, and I was on my way. And she tells me there's a tornado warning. Tornado warnings in Colorado mean that the tornado has actually been spotted. The funnel clouds have been spotted. So just be on the watch. It might not be in your area, but be diligent and look for it. So for the next few hours, that's just where we were going to live, in a tornado warning. And I was driving up a hill, getting ready to get on the highway. And in my view, windshield, my entire view, it was just black. It was crazy. The storm was obviously over there, and it looked like it was to the south of where I was, and it was getting ready to come over. But as I got closer, I gained perspective. Pretty soon, that wasn't just my entire windshield. I could actually see the edges of the storm. And then it dawns on me that that's the actual tornado. That thing is actually probably about 2 miles away. It's close. Now, the Windsor tornado, if you were in the area, you remember this, and if you weren't, then I'm going to give you a little bit about it. It was actually traveled for 39 miles. It was on the ground for 39 continuous miles. It's a long tornado, and the path it took from south to north, very unusual for a tornado in Colorado to take this path. It was at its largest peak, it was about a mile wide, so it was pretty large. And it had an estimated peak wind of 165 miles per hour. That's crazy. So when I saw the tornado, it was about at the halfway point of its journey. I, along with the other motorists, we parked under an overpass to just wait it out, but that was short-lived because the tornado started coming for us. We were forced to drive away, turning this 2-lane highway in northern Colorado into a 4-lane highway. We were all just driving like crazy just to get away from this thing as fast as we could. And while we were doing that, softball hail began to fall. Now, my poor work truck took a beating. The toolboxes in the back were shredded. Softball-size hail is huge. My windshield takes a beating and actually caves in on the dash. I'm driving without a windshield to get out of this thing. And it was really, really crazy. It was pretty intense. To be in the truck now with Jesus, that would have been better. I probably would have had the same reactions as the disciples here. Just looking at him like, hey, can you turn this thing off? Can you flip the switch and calm this storm? That would be awesome. And when you and I read this story, it's easy to read it with a little hindsight bias, where you and I would say, oh, I would have had the faith out of the gate and said, nope, Jesus is with me. He's going to shut this thing off. I got it. We're safe here. But would we? Would we honestly do that? You and I would say we have the faith in that. That's because we have hindsight bias. But the truth is we probably would have panicked just like the other 12 guys in that boat. These are grown men. These are hardened fishermen. And they're panicking. So we know this storm's crazy. And how do I know we'd panic? Because you and I are human, and that's human nature to allow our physical surroundings to influence our spiritual decisions. That's just how we're made. We travel through a physical world and base most of our decisions on physical input. Sight, touch, sound, taste. But what about the things we experience every day that aren't so physical? How do we navigate relationships, financial decisions, job risks, the path we take in our education? What about those things? We also rely on physical cues to go off of on those things, but we also base those things on past decisions, past experiences. What worked, what didn't. Well, I got burned here, so I'm not going to make that same mistake. I overextended and overspent on my checking account, so I know not to do that now. But what if the first thing we consulted was not our past experience or our physical surroundings, but actually was Jesus? Our faith experiences should dictate our current trajectory of our faith. Meaning that God has come through in our past, we should remember those. We should know how that went, how that felt, that we didn't quite know what was going to happen, but somehow we got through it. And that will project us into the new ones. He has gotten us through it before, and He will again. It might not be the exact moment that we wanted to be saved. We might have experienced a little more storm than what we care for. The storm might have actually raged a little too long, in our opinion, and we would have ended it if we were in charge a little bit sooner. But that's not how God works sometimes. God comes in exactly when He means to come in. He intervenes in a storm in our life exactly at the right moment because He knows what's best. Saving for us might come after the worst, but it will come in the end. We might have experienced the depth of tragedy, but God will intervene at some point. So for tonight's discussion, I want to ask this. What storm in your life do you need to refocus on? Have you asked Jesus why you're experiencing this storm? How would that answer change your perspective on the current storm that you're in? Does it give you new faith? Does it allow you to reframe and refocus all that God has in store for you, even in the middle of a storm? Let's talk about that.